This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast. Hooray! It's your friends at BBC Radio 2 here. Various and assorted sinful members of the public, all wandering forward to tell their tales of deceit, debauchery and deception, and seeking forgiveness from Joe and from Bobby, who are looking very, very unforgiving, if you don't mind me saying.
This is my forgiving face.
Oh.
Be afraid, be very, very afraid. Very afraid. This week's confession collection includes Claire's sinful story. Jacqueline Wilson says, Pete's confession, up on the woof. I was never sure that worked completely.
Up on the woof.
Okay. And Neil's tale, flashbang wallop, what a picture, what a photograph. Plus we have a classic confession from the crypt that's been requested by the very person the confession is all about.
Details to come. We start this week's podcast with, this is a great title, Nessun Korma.
Whoa!
Please be seated.
Dear Simon and the gathering of gracious pardoning, having watched England play Tunisia in the World Cup last week, I felt I needed to confess my sins that took place 20 years ago when England last played them in the World Cup during France 1998. So what with England playing in an hour and 15 minutes? Not that we're interested in that at all, because we've got some top songs to be playing between
Couldn't care
7 and 8.
less.
That's right. Unless Bob just wants to come in and do an hour of country, in which case that'd be good. So
Well,
it's
Bobby could do an hour of travel. We don't mind.
Okay.
country and travel mixed. Bob and Bobby
The remix.
together at last. That'd be very good. Anyway, Jamie says, I was coming to the end of my marine biology degree and had spent most of the spring revising for my finals and visiting the careers centre of the university. At the centre, I collected application forms for job forms for any job that I could find, even though none of them slightly related to my degree in marine biology. These were all techie jobs and not at all about marine biology, but needs must, so I applied for them. I sent off the application forms, and to my surprise I had a letter inviting me to an assessment centre with a large IT/telecoms company. This was to be a 2-day assessment centre at a rather posh country hotel, and the first day would be June the 15th. Which caused me a problem. That would coincide with England's first match of the World Cup against Tunisia. And since 1990, I hadn't missed a single England game, whether on TV or at the actual match. But as I said, needs must, and the chance to get on the career ladder far outweighed my need to follow my national team. So on a hot Monday, I arrived at the hotel in the middle of the countryside, new ill-fitting suit, correctly on display. Unfortunately, we began half an hour before the England match kicked off in a large meeting room. There were about 20 of us, fresh-faced graduates, sat around a large meeting room table, and I took my seat and wrote my name big and clear on the name card in front of me. I spent that first day going through a range of psychometric tests, interviews and group exercises. None of them were related to the telecoms industry, therefore I felt like I was flying and impressing people. I glowed with confidence. At the end of the day, we retired to our rooms to freshen up, change into more casual clothes, and then back down to be treated to a lovely meal. I got chatting to two fellow graduates called Lee and Stephen, who were equally frustrated with the lack of opportunity to watch the match. As we headed to the bar in the evening, the drinks started to flow, and when the England highlights came on, flowed some more. And then, to be honest, kept flowing for the next, 5 hours or so. And by now, everyone else had gone back to their rooms to get early nights and prepare for the second and final day of the assessment. But for us, it was definitely tequila and chicken korma o'clock. My alarm went off the next morning. It's very unwise behaviour, isn't it? My alarm went off the next morning at 8 o'clock and I thought my head was caving in. The room was spinning. I felt sick. My head was pounding. When I got to my seat downstairs, everyone looked fresh-faced, whilst I was about to die. And then things got worse. Right about the time Martin, the graduate manager, opened his mouth, to be exact. This second day was going to concentrate on telecoms, computer networks and business analysis. And what came out of his mouth can only be described as utter nonsense to me. It was double Dutch. Everyone else seemed to be taking it in and nodding wisely. I couldn't nod because it hurt my head too much. We soon split into groups and spent 15 minutes working on a scenario, and whilst I nodded along, I had no idea what they were talking about. Then Martin called time and went around the groups asking for their thoughts, but I had my head down pretending to make notes. One graduate, who was called Ian, seemed to be doing all the talking and asking questions. a well-spoken and clearly extremely intelligent fella who knew his stuff. Martin, the graduate manager, was nodding and smiling, and when Ian finished his latest point, Martin said, "Absolutely. Excellent point, Jamie." Well, this woke me up slightly, because I'm Jamie, and I'm the only person in the room called Jamie. Had I nodded off and said something by mistake? No, I don't think so. Still, this guy called Ian made comments and asked questions, and still Martin called him Jamie. I was confused. I looked up and looked across the room, and there was Ian talking away, but with my name card in front of him. The name card I'd written the day before. We were sitting in the wrong place. I opened my mouth to inform Martin that I was Jamie, and they'd got the wrong person. But the urge to be sick took over, and so I closed my mouth and I put my head down again. Surely Martin will know he had the wrong person. Surely Ian would correct Martin. To be honest, I stopped listening at this point, as my head felt it was about to explode. At 2 p.m. we said our goodbyes, and I gingerly made my way back to the station and went home feeling grim, just wanting to put the whole episode behind me. My parents were appalled. But it was with a huge amount of surprise when a week or so later I received a phone call from the bloke called Martin, telling me the assessment panel were impressed with me. The marine biology graduate would be offering me the job, working for an IT telecoms company. To say the least, I was stunned. My parents were amazed. A month later, I made my way south to start my new life and career, and when I arrived in the reception of the company, there were Lee and Stephen, my beery partners in crime. They were open-mouthed, as the three of us were the only ones from the assessment centre who made it through. There was no sign of clever Ian anywhere. Within a week of starting the job, I knew I was out at my depth, but I stuck at it for 4 years, even though I hated every single minute. 20 years on, I'm a successful management trainer, but I still look back on that day with a lot of guilt. One misplaced name card was all it had taken for me to get the job that should have gone to somebody else. So, clearly, I need forgiveness from Ian, as he should have corrected Martin. I don't seek forgiveness from Martin, who should have noted who was who the day before. I do, however, seek forgiveness from the various project managers I worked under in that company who must have wondered what the hell the company had recruited, and also to the many millions of customers of that company who will curse the telephone system that I was responsible for designing. So this is very specific. So who would have thought that Jamie was to get the gig, but clearly they just appointed the wrong guy because he was sitting in the wrong place by the wrong name tag. Anyway, it's Jamie's confession, and Joe speaks first.
Yeah, absolutely not forgiven in any way, shape or form. I mean, I kind of feel a little bit of sympathy for him because he had to, put himself under immense pressure when he began the job. But no way, this is what happens if you drink until, from tequila and chicken korma o'clock until, the very next morning. Apparently, I would quite like that phrase. But no, not forgiven. Ridiculous. He should have obviously fessed up.
Yeah. Okay, so not forgiven.
No.
All right.
Does remind me, though, of doing an evening session thing with Steve Lamack once with TerraVision. Didn't they sing about tequila?
Yeah,
Oh, they did,
We did a show,
Yeah.
and then we went out drinking afterwards, and we drank a lot of tequila.
With
But
Terra-
after work.
After work, yeah, but then we had a panel the next morning. And so actually, the way that Jamie was just describing the way he was feeling was the way I was feeling
Very
when we were
familiar.
doing this panel, yeah. So maybe a little bit of sympathy, but no, not forgiven at all. He should have fessed up. Poor Ian lost out on the job, and Jamie, you should feel
Yeah.
ashamed.
Bobby.
I think what might have happened, you see, because the thing is, there's many twists and turns in this, but I think Martin, the trainer, saw them in the bar, thought, those are the guys that I want to work with in this job that's maybe not so exciting, and those are the guys that will get you through a very unexciting job. So I think that maybe Martin actually did pick the best people, but on a very different merit system that we don't know about. That's what I think.
Well,
and it's
that's very
difficult because
clever.
Ian is quite smart, so I can't work out why Ian didn't go, I've got the wrong name card, and he wasn't off on tequila all night. So Ian has some responsibility in that. You see, Martin, it's not all Jamie's fault. It's not all Jamie's fault, and he wasn't to expect the consequences. He didn't expect to get a job, did he? But he didn't try, he didn't lie. So I think...
Go
There's
on.
an element of deceit there, isn't there?
What does he say? When they ring up and say, do you want the job? And he go, do you mean me? I don't think you can say that when you really... I
guess.
don't think even I would. I'd say, I give it my best shot. So I think, Jamie, you should have left that job earlier. That's the only thing. But you are forgiven in this tiny case.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the Divine Deliverers of Absolution. This is Neil's confession. Wednesday night confession here. Gather round. This story, I think it's a PG anyway. This story starts on the other side of the globe, in Australia, in the mid-1990s, when I met Fiona. She was a medical student at Aberdeen University, and I was about to embark on a professional training in the profession of personnel management. We were both young, free and single when we met in Alice Springs, and we just hit it off. Although our itineraries didn't allow for much time together, just a couple of evenings enjoying the local amber nectar. After some fun times, we exchanged contact details and we went our separate ways. Back in the UK and starting my studies at Stockport Business School, it wasn't too long before I decided to give Fiona a call in Aberdeen. Well, one thing led to another and a long-distance relationship developed, and Fridays were characterised by either me or Fiona jumping on the train to visit each other. The relationship continued to blossom and we both graduated successfully from our studies. I think it was about this time I sent Fiona some flowers and followed up with a visit and a night out to celebrate. I seem to recall a black tie ball, one where you would take a camera, and at some point over the weekend I decided it would be a great idea to use Fiona's camera to take a photo of myself, a selfie in today's parlance, wearing only the large pretty pink bow from the bouquet of flowers.
Oh dear.
How funny it would be, I thought, when Fiona collected the photos from the chemist. I don't know, ask your parents. As she perused through photos of the celebrations to find, at the end, a random one of me, her pin-up Englishman. What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong?
The next time Fiona visited, it was at my parents' house. And knowing that my mum would be keen to see the photos of the black tie ball, Fiona took out our special photo and put it in a separate envelope to ensure it was for our eyes only. This envelope plays a big part in the story, and I'll return to it in a moment. Now that we had graduated, we needed to face finding a real job in the real world. With Fiona having junior doctor placements lined up in Scotland, well, there was a suitable job for me being advertised at the council in Aberdeen, where Fiona's mother worked. She very kindly did a lot of the groundwork for my application, even writing the covering letter and addressing the envelope. All I had to do was to sign the letter and enclose a copy of my CV. Now, this was a very kind thing for Fiona's mother to do. I think it was particularly altruistic, but mainly driven by the fact she didn't want Fiona to be tempted south of the border and away from her beloved Scotland. However, what I didn't realise was that the application envelope was the same envelope we had used to keep our private special photograph in a very safe place for safekeeping. Consequently, my application contained a letter, a reasonable CV, and a very impressive photograph.
He says.
To make matters worse, Fiona's mother hand-delivered the application to her boss and put in a good word for me because she hadn't realised that the photo was in there. Father Simon, I don't seek forgiveness from Fiona as things didn't work out between us. I do want to apologise to those who opened my application and got much more than a CV to demonstrate my credentials. Needless to say, I didn't even get an interview, let alone the job. Most of all, I seek forgiveness from Fiona's mum, who had the indignity of being called in to her boss's office, being handed the envelope back and being told that no more would be said about the matter. Isn't that an amazing kind of classic British thing to do? P.S. I saw Fiona's mum again after the incident. Nothing was ever mentioned.
Oh, no.
Well, let that be a warning to you, Neil. You know, you take a rogue photograph, you never know where it's going to end up. And nice period reference there to going to the chemist to picking up the photographs. Anyway, yes, Joe.
Gosh, how times have changed. How times have changed. This is, I mean, totally forgiven because this is not his fault. He was taking a photograph as a little bit of a prank, as a joke. The only thing I have issue with is him saying the impressive photograph, obviously trying to... He doth protest too much, I think, trying to build up his own part. So that's a little bit dodgy, yeah. But otherwise, yeah, forgiven because this is just a very funny story. I'm kind of sad that things didn't work out because that would have been something, you know, an enduring memory or a bond between him and his mother-in-law. But obviously that was not to be. But forgiven.
I just love the fact that no one has said anything. We're just not going to mention it. Sister Bobby.
I love this. It was such a lovely romantic story. You go to Alice Springs in the 90s with its neighbours and home and away time. So kind of Australia's still quite new to people there. So well done for getting away. So you've done Alice Springs, Stockport and Scotland. You've gone through all that and you break up. That is very sad. The only thing I'm not really impressed about, Neil, is you took a picture of yourself and you decided that's what she needed, Fiona needed.
Good point.
You didn't. I mean, it's not something she asked for. You went, look, have this with a bow tie on it. I don't think she did need it, but I think also it could have been a deal breaker, a really good deal breaker, because to the right kind of boss, they might have laughed at that and thought that was very funny and thought you were their kind of person.
True.
I don't know what job that is that you're their
Do we
kind
know
of
if
person for.
did Fiona ever see the photograph again? Once it was handed in the envelope, I just think it was posted to the guy for the job.
Her mum
We
kept
don't
it
know.
because it went
Oh.
back to her mum. Didn't it? She got called in and the envelope was passed back, but the mum kept the envelope.
She kept it.
Anyway, didn't work out, did it?
That could have taken the story in a whole
And the
different...
long-winded way round. You're not forgiven, Neil. You shouldn't take photos like that when people don't ask for them.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that was Neil's exposing tale. Flash, bang, wallop, what a picture, what a photograph, which caused this response on the People's Verdict. Forgiven. I worked for a photographic developing company in the 1980s, and we used to stick censored stickers on the nude bits after we'd all had a really good laugh.
It occurred to me afterwards, I also worked in a pharmacy,
Did you?
but we never had those stickers.
How is you develop photographs, not just sold
Well,
lip gloss?
people would bring in their roll of film, and then it would be sent off, and then it would come back, and you just hand the packet over.
Oh, you didn't go through the photographs
Well,
looking for
I
nude
think
bits.
some people did in the pharmacy.
But you're not one of those.
I would not have been
One of
of
those people.
Anyway, still to come on the podcast, the confession that made Joe and Bobby react like this.
No. Oh, my God.
And then...
No. Oh, my God.
I might have this as my ringtone.
No.
I think out of context.
Oh, my. You should probably not do that.
Yes. It could be
You'll
very
be out of-
wrong.
Okay, that's a fair point. I've changed my mind. Before you hear any more of this week's confessions, it's time to head over to the parish notice board to find out what you in this parish have been saying. Joe's going first.
I do. I have this from Fern in Australia. Good day, Simon, Joe and Bobby from the land down under, from a dedicated, very long-time
Hang
listener.
on, that
The
is
accent's
brilliant.
gone. The accent lasted
Well-
a sentence and then it's gone.
Probably lasted a word more
That
than
was,
anything.
yeah, but
No,
she's
then
nearly
it-
as good as you.
Oh, stop it.
Oh,
Don't do
what praise, what praise. Nearly as good at accents as Simon. Then she says in brackets, you don't need to do this in an Australian accent, as I'm from Lincolnshire.
Okay,
and not a
phew.
hint of an Aussie accent going on here, which I'd read in advance. So there you go.
Sorry.
Can you please give a shout out to my lovely Dutch colleague, Michael Keat, who is leaving Brisbane Airport and returning back to his native Schiphol Airport? Would that be the right
That's right,
pronunciation?
yeah.
Thank you. I introduced Michael to your Glorious Confessions podcast, and he is now up to date and has listened to all of them. We regularly have animated confession conversations to the bewilderment of other airport staff, usually caused by my laughing, snorting and crying, all very attractive qualities. I shall miss Michael, his colourful shirts and of course our confession catch-ups, but he says he will continue to listen after his move and no doubt spread the confessions word once back in Holland. Have a fabulous week and hooroo! Saying goodbye when you depart sounds unnecessarily formal to an Aussie. We'd much rather say, see ya, or if we're in a more expansive mood, you might be on the receiving end of a hooroo.
That sounds weird.
Does that make any sense at all?
Well, so hooroo is a way of saying goodbye, but is less formal.
It's like saying see ya. Hooroo!
Well, just say see ya.
I go to Australia a lot.
Have you ever
An
heard
awful
that?
lot. Never, ever heard that, ever. I wasn't trying to boast. I'm saying for work, I've had to go and it's been brilliant, but I've never, ever heard that with
Are they
any
just
of my
trying
Aussie
to
friends.
make us look stupid, foolish, do you think?
I think maybe.
I think
Well, we've
Fern's
done that.
Been on the Amber Nectar or something like that.
Right, Fern also requested the Screaming Blue Hot Trot Confession from the Crypt, and you can find this on the... Already there is laughter. You can find this on the Confession podcast from the 16th of February 2018.
So, Bobby, you have something interesting there for
I
us.
do. I have this from Elizabeth, and it says, Dear Simon, Bobby and Jojo, my name is Elizabeth and I am 10 years old. My mum and I listened to your podcast in the car, and some of the confessions reminded me about this story. When I was 5 years old, my mum had bought me a bejewelled plastic tiara, but to me it felt like a valuable, priceless piece of jewellery. I was a pretty princess. I brought my new tiara to the summer camp and wore it on the field trip to medieval times. During the field trip, my favourite counsellor, let's call her Suzanne, asked if she could try on my tiara. I was extremely proactive. I was extremely protective of my new tiara and did not want to let anyone touch it, not even Suzanne. I shook my head. No, Suzanne. Suzanne looked at me curiously and asked jokingly, Elizabeth, do you have lice?
Oh.
As there had been a bout of lice at my school earlier in the year, I knew that would make her not want to wear my tiara anymore. So I said, yes,
Good.
yes, I have lice. Imagine my mum's surprise to a phone call from the camp asking, your child has lice? The next day, I showed up at summer camp yet again, and my least favourite counsellor, I'll call him Jeremy, told my mum, if your child has lice, you can't bring her to camp. My mum, almost roaring, said again that I was perfectly clean. I turned to you for forgiveness for pretending to have creepy crawlies all over my scalp. I also asked forgiveness for Suzanne, my summer camp, and my mum, who was truly mortified at the whole situation.
As you would be.
I'm sorry, but it says my mum... Sorry, I just got confused. Apologies.
That's all right. I understood it perfectly. I think I think it shows great initiative. If you want to keep... No one wants to share their tiara. I certainly didn't want to share my tiara. And so pretending you've got lice seems a very intelligent way.
But she probably thought lice was something very special and not like some kind of rancid creepy crawly that lurks in your hair.
Well, the thing is, they only like clean hair, don't they? That's the difficult thing.
Good point.
But trying to get rid of them...
Oh, don't talk to me about that.
I've got this from Ryan, Simon, Joe and Bobby. Great podcast, which my kids and at times my wife began listening to on the way to skiing every Saturday. A great start to the day and always a giggle. I know they would get a massive kick out of hearing Ellie's confession read out on the pod, but I digress. The reason for my email is that Eleanor has been guilt-ridden for the last 2 years, so she's finally telling you this. And this is Eleanor, okay? This is Eleanor now.
Any accents?
I don't know how Eleanor speaks. I think Eleanor might speak in a very kind of neutral... Male kind of middle-aged London way. I seek forgiveness for something that happened when I was 7. I was walking with my dad, my brother Charlie, who was 5 at the time, and our puppy Max, no longer a puppy, in Nyon in Switzerland. My dad went into a shop and he left me and Charlie with Max outside. After a few minutes, maybe 10, it was my turn to hold Max and Charlie went into the shop to see Dad, so I was left outside holding Max. After a while I got a bit bored holding Max, so I attached his lead to a pole. Max was very good and sat still till another dog went by and Max started barking and running after the other dog. Unfortunately, the pole I'd attached Max to had wheels. What kind of a pole has wheels?
A bike?
And held loads of postcards. And of course, when Max ran after the dog, the pole went with him on the wheels and the postcards were sent flying everywhere, all over the pavement and the road. Dad and the shop owner came out to see what all the noise was about, and then we had to clean up all the postcards. Charlie just watched. I don't seek forgiveness from the shop owner who helped us, as she should get a more sturdy postcard stand. I think that's entirely fair. And some new postcards, and not from Dad, who shouldn't have left us outside, but from Max, our dog, who still, every time he sees a postcard stand or those things outside shops in touristy places, feels shame, and his tail goes between his legs, and he shows the whites of his eyes. We listen to the podcast in the car, so can we have a sticker? We subscribed Mum to the podcast, even though we listen on Dad's phone. If there are none left, anything will do, except a Steve Wright clock. Well, we haven't got that. All the Steve Wright clocks are gone. All the stickers are gone. We've got is that a Steve Wright pencil? A Radio 2 pencil? Biro.
That's
a Radio
good.
2 biro.
Because they're rare. They don't exist anywhere, do
no
they?
one wants them, that's why.
Not like the Steve Wright clocks and the Steve Wright vests that you can get. None of them left in the
I like
universe.
the idea of tying a dog to a movable pole.
The thing is, I left my dog once outside Quicksave and I went home. This was in Oswestry when I was very young. And it took me 2 hours to realise that I had... It's a confession.
Oh, you'd left the dog there?
Yeah, and he was still there, being fed by everybody and being made a fuss of.
So he was very happy.
Next time you take the moral high ground on the confession, we're just going to quit. What's the dog's name?
It was Tubby. He's not
Tubby.
with us anymore.
We'll just tell the Tubby story back again.
Remember, if you want to get in touch with the podcast, you might have your own confession. You might want to request a classic one that made you laugh out loud. Or maybe you've just managed to sneakily do that thing of subscribing your mates to the podcast and you want to boast about it. All you have to do is email confessions@bbc.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you.
Now, inevitably, it's time for the sleazy part of the notice board, the non-compliant confessions, which can never be read out on the radio. I should say that X-rated doesn't always have to involve bodily evacuations, by the way. Maybe one week it'd be nice to get some criminal or dangerous or illegal acts instead of just a steady stream of vomit and poo.
You're asking for criminals.
No, criminals aren't very good. But, basically it's been vomit and poo all week.
It does highlight that human beings basically,
Excrete.
And vom.
Well, we're not very good at holding it all in, are we? There's some
Inherently, it's quite
failures.
funny.
We were born to leak, I think.
Born to leak.
Anyway, Ralph, your story about your uncle a little toilet accident one day after eating too many oysters at a posh restaurant in London. What followed was a complicated tale involving getting a stranger to go into a shop and buy him dark trousers, changing in a train toilet, and then dispensing with his soiled trousers out the window of the moving train. At this point in the story, Ralph's uncle then went into the bag to get the new trousers, only to find a lady's pink jumper in there instead, and ended up leaving the train wearing what looked like pink tights on his legs and a bowler hat covering his bits and pieces. Very funny story if it didn't involve soiled trousers, Ralph, which therefore makes it unfit for broadcast. Martin is another sorry soul whose confession just isn't fit for tea time radio, given that it involves a roller coaster ride, an overconfident dad, and the reappearance of several weeks' worth of food, it would seem. And let's not forget the immortal line in Martin's confession as quoted from a child Martin didn't know in the car in front, which went, "Ugh, some of it got in my mouth."
Moving on.
Okay. Very stern. After our final word goes to Cheryl, who, fed up of months and years of her husband smothering her lovely cooked meals in brown sauce on the grounds that they all taste the same to me, love, needs a bit of flavour, finally decided she'd had enough. On one fateful night, Cheryl decided to make her husband stew out of a special ingredient, namely kitten food. And watched in delight as he scoffed the lot, and then watched in actual glee as his face changed when she told him. Just to be clear, none of these are okay, if slightly funny.
That is not okay, though.
Look at the stern face on that.
Add a bit of brown sauce. Fine. Though you might send us your tale, confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Now, if you're not feeling too queasy, it's time to get back to this week's confessions. And here's Claire's simple story, Jacqueline Wilson Says, featuring the actual Jacqueline Wilson herself as part of the collective.
The Confessions Podcast.
Simon, Joe and Bobby, my confession happened during the mid-1990s when I was working as a young librarian in a large urban high school. This was before the era of Harry Potter, and encouraging teenagers to read was an uphill struggle. Therefore, I decided to try and inspire the students with a visit from an author. And aiming for the very, very best, I wrote to Jacqueline Wilson, begging her to visit our school and inject some much-needed reading enthusiasm into our apathetic teenagers. I was over the moon when she wrote back and agreed. I must stress that although hugely popular, Jacqueline had not yet reached the stratosphere of fame that she enjoys today, and was, at that time, still visiting lots of schools. When I told them the news, the students were beyond excited. Computers were forgotten, discussions about which was the best band, Oasis or Blur, because this is a coloured, period fiction here, were abandoned, and conversations about last night's episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer faded into oblivion as talk of Jacqueline Wilson's visit reached fever pitch. The day arrived. Jacqueline received the red carpet treatment and unsurprisingly had a real affinity with the students. She spent the entire morning talking to them about her writing and answering all their questions, and by lunchtime we were both ready for a break. Being a woman of the world, I was sure that Jacqueline would appreciate some quiet time away from the hustle and bustle of school, so I had booked a table at the local hostelry. I was a little concerned that Jacqueline's distinctive looks and famous name may be instantly recognisable, and I was worried that people in the pub would mob her and demand autographs. As at the pub, we were greeted by the maître d'. I've never heard of a pub with a maître d', but anyway, a rather stringy and sullen woman who showed us to our table. The menu was somewhat limited, we are talking the mid-90s here, and we ordered quiche and chips. Classic combo. The food was passable, but the conversation was a delight. Jacqueline was so friendly and relaxed, and we chatted about our mutual love of music and books. I told a few amusing anecdotes about my job and was overjoyed when Jacqueline whipped out her notebook and jotted down an idea for a story. Flushed with success, I had visions of a dedication in her next book, with special thanks to Claire, without whose help, and so on and so on. Anyway, the pub was quiet, but I did notice that a family on the next table kept shooting us looks, and I grew increasingly concerned that Jacqueline's cover had been blown. The last thing I wanted was our relaxed lunch to be interrupted by gawping autograph hunters. Go away, I thought. We ordered coffees, and then I realised that time was running out and we needed to get back to school. I brought the conversation to a close, we put on our coats and stood ready to leave. The people on the next table were still eyeing us, so I swiftly ushered Jacqueline towards the exit. I realised we'd been rumbled when I saw the maître d' behind the bar frantically waving a piece of paper at us. Really, I thought irritably, the autograph hunters get everywhere. Can they not just leave a famous author alone for 5 minutes? I bundled Jacqueline out of the pub, into the car, back to the school. I have to say that she did appear slightly nonplussed by our swift exit, but I guess that she was simply too well bred to comment on the annoyance of autograph hunters, and was probably really grateful that I had handled the situation with such aplomb. The afternoon session went well, and at the end of the day a taxi arrived to whisk Jacqueline back to the station, and we parted the best of friends. However, as I was heading back to the library, our school receptionist called me over. Now, our receptionist didn't have much tolerance for librarians like me and thought book weeks were a complete waste of time, so I have to say that her tone of voice was bordering on triumphant. "The manager of the Red Lion has phoned. She said you had quiche and chips twice and 2 coffees, and she wants to know when you're actually going to pay the bill." Well, I was horror-stricken. That waving piece of paper, Jacqueline's puzzlement when we raced out of the pub, it was all to do with the fact I hadn't paid the bill. My hopes of a dedication in the next book were dashed. Why would you dedicate a book to someone who's guilty of stealing quiche and chips? Therefore, I ask forgiveness not from the publican who received full payment and a red-faced apology the following day, not from the nosy family on the next table who clearly hadn't registered Jacqueline Wilson and were probably mildly confused by our speedy exit, but I would like to seek forgiveness from Jacqueline herself for being such a gauche, star-struck and overzealous young librarian, and if she's listening, I'm still waiting for that dedication. Well, it's a very interesting tale, and you can see how, Claire's very excited. I've said before, I think school librarians run the universe, and she's clearly thinking, this is how I can get things to work in my favour. All went very well, apart from the fact that she didn't pay the bill. Anyway, Jo goes first.
Well, as a librarian, I'm not myself a librarian, but as Claire being a librarian, I can imagine just how starstruck she was by meeting Jacqueline Wilson, who's a very wonderful person. But I'm obviously a little bit protective. It goes on quite a lot about the autograph hunters and trying to protect her from the autograph hunters. Mm-hmm. But the fact that she did take her out to a pub and treated her to quiche and chips, which is such a wonderful meal. I mean, the meal of kings and queens, I think. I think I'd forgive her just for getting in a little bit of a state because she's kind of flustered and she really, really loved Jacqueline Wilson and obviously just left in a hurry.
We'll have to mention quiche and chips to the Bosch boys, see if they can do
I love quiche and chips.
I'm sure they can do a vegan quiche. I'm sure they can, yeah. Anyway, Bobby, what do you say to Claire?
First of all, beans always with the quiche and chips. Anyway, moving on.
Baked beans.
Always hot baked beans, cold quiche and hot chips.
Yep,
there you go. Can I forgive this? I think so. What I really love about Claire is you just made an effort. You got an author in, and the only thing I do think, though, is if Jacqueline hadn't hit the heady heights, she might have liked to sign the autograph. You didn't need to be so protective. Maybe she liked the attention, but I think it's really easy, really, really, really easy to forgive you.
Yes.
This time.
Okay, so let's go back to the thing. Claire says, I would like to seek forgiveness from Jacqueline herself for being such a gauche, star-struck, overzealous young librarian, and if she's listening, I'm still waiting for that dedication. Are you listening, Jacqueline Wilson?
I am, Simon. I am listening and chuckling away.
Hey! It's Dame Jacqueline, and she's back on radio too. So you did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of school visits. I don't suppose you remember this one.
Well, I must admit there were quite a few similar occasions, but Claire, I love all school librarians, and I think you've always done a fantastic job. And I think you sound an absolute sweetheart, and you were trying so hard. I actually, truly don't mind signing autographs, but I'm so touched that you wanted to protect me, and also how lovely to have quiche and chips in the pub rather than some of those weird school meals on odd days, just like prison food. So I forgive you 100%. Okay.
And just the thing about the notebook that you took out, is that something that you do regularly? Because she's still hoping to either be in a story or actually get a mention somewhere.
Just occasionally if somebody tells me something really amusing, I might say, look, do you mind if I jot that down? Truthfully, I have no idea what it was. But if Claire can recognise anything in any of my books that I've written since the 1990s, maybe she does need a dedication.
I actually need to ask forgiveness of my daughter, Coco, who's 9 years old, because when Jacqueline Wilson very kindly came on my show as part of the nation's favourites, I forgot to tell her that I got Jacqueline on the show, and we were going through her bookshelf the other day, and I'd got loads of your books, Jacqueline, and I said, oh yeah, and she was on my show a little while ago, and Coco just looked at me like, how did you not tell me she was coming in to talk to you? So I need to ask forgiveness of Coco.
Well, I promise the next time we meet up, I'll sign. I mean, Coca can even bring all the books in. I'll sign the lot.
Yeah.
How
Thank
about
you.
that?
You're lovely.
And I have to add, just to make things worse for you, Joe,
What?
I have a photograph. My daughter loved Jacqueline Wilson as well, and I have a photograph of Natasha, Jacqueline Wilson, and Mallory Blackman, who was also in the same photograph. So you just pass that on to Coco.
Yeah,
I'm sure that'll
thanks.
make her feel an awful lot better.
Thanks a bunch.
You mean thing.
Jacqueline, lovely to talk to you. When's your next book out?
I've had a book out in May, Rose Rivers, but if I could mention a brilliant adaptation of a book called Double Act, which is on at the Polka Theatre at the moment, smashing outing for a summer holiday treat. How about that?
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. There's Jacqueline Wilson adding some extra forgiveness for Claire.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Simon and the Heavily Collective, my confession, pay attention now. My confession goes back to 2005 and a gloomy winter's night with the prospect of our son Tom's parents' evening. He was in his last year at primary school and he'd just completed his mock SATs, so this meeting would give us a good indication of his expected results. We sat down looking up at the teacher. How is he doing? Will Tom get a 5, the top mark? The teacher became animated. Not a hope. He's lazy, bone idle, and puts the minimum of effort. He'll be lucky to get a 3. I was a little shocked to be hearing these words. He'd always seemed to be putting in the correct effort at home. Afterwards, my wife suggested that perhaps we should set an incentive for Tom to work harder. Like most children of that age, he'd been nagging constantly for a dog. See, Bobby? Oh. But I had always resisted a life of picking up dog poo, vet bills, and how I would get lumbered walking it. My wife said, let's say he can have a dog if he gets all 5s in his SATs. The teacher says he's got no chance, so it might pull him up to a 4 and we won't have to get a dog. Genius,
Wow.
I thought. What could happen? Finally, the day the results arrived. Tom opened the results and suddenly was dancing around the living room. I'm getting a dog! I'm getting a dog! I've got all 5s. Now, most parents would have been overjoyed at their son's success, not me. What do you mean? You sure it's got your name on it? Sure they're your results? The teacher said you wouldn't get anywhere above a 4. Well, I eventually conceded and we were about to get a new fur child. We decided to go to the local dog shelter and rescue one, and Tom immediately headed to a Springer Spaniel called Fletcher. The volunteers said he was a very well-trained dog, but the previous owners just couldn't cope with his energy and love of sport. I wondered what he meant by this, but for some reason didn't ask. Now, Fletcher was not really a lead dog. He would amble alongside you without any bother. Well, at least that's what I thought at first. On one walk, we were at the local park when we stopped to watch a football match with a reasonable-sized crowd around the pitch. Suddenly, the crowd started to roar as the Blues centre-forward broke clear with only the goalkeeper to beat. He rounded the keeper and was just about to score when Fletcher charged onto the pitch, whipped the ball from his feet and began to dribble up the other end. The crowd and the players were not, as you can imagine, that impressed. Fletcher charged over looking very proud of himself. He had no idea what he'd done wrong. I made my apologies and swiftly departed. Fletcher's aforementioned love of sport or balls was now becoming apparent. He would chase the cricket ball and stop it going for a 4. He would wait for the tennis balls to be hit out of the court and run off with them. And if anyone was playing golf in the park, they would never see their ball again. Fletcher loved balls. He was very skillful, and we soon realised that we would not be able to walk him during times sport was being played in the park. So we decided to walk him early morning and late at night to avoid any problems. That was the plan. Early one Sunday morning, we were doing just that, and I scanned the park to check for any sport or ball games. We were clear. I could enjoy my walk without fear of a punch-up or a confrontation. It was a beautiful day. The skies were clear, the sun shone, and we were both enjoying the surroundings. Suddenly, Fletcher's ears pricked, and he became curious of a family gathering in the distance. A large group of people were standing at the bottom of the hill around a little girl holding a red balloon. Fletcher was gone, racing towards the family. What was he going to do? As there were no balls, it was just a red balloon. As Fletcher arrived on the scene, the little girl let go of her red balloon. He leapt in the air, jaws open wide, front legs fully stretched, and in what seemed like slow motion, managed to make contact and burst the balloon. That was bad enough. But that wasn't the worst of it, because as soon as the balloon burst, immediately there were clouds of dust, and the blue skies were now turning A smog of grey and flakes of dust covered the family's hair and clothes. The little girl burst into tears. That's my granddad.
No.
We were sending him to heaven. Now he's got to stay in the park.
Oh, my God.
Some of the women in the group were now crying, whilst others just looked on shocked. As you can imagine, I wanted the ground to swallow me up. Fletcher, meanwhile, had heard the little girl say the word dead and was now lying on his back, motionless with his legs in the air. It was one of his tricks. His eyes were shut, his tongue was hanging out the side of his mouth, because when you said that, that's what he did. As devastating as all this was, the family eventually saw the funny side and said the granddad would have loved it. However, to this day, I still feel some guilt, and so on the anniversary of this terrible incident, myself and Fletcher walked slowly over to the spot. We placed some flowers and a red balloon by the tree.
Aww.
To make matters worse, on attending our other child's parents' evening a few years later, the teacher admitted she got Tom muddled up all those years ago with another Tom in his class, and she apologised for calling him bone idle when in fact he was already on target for a full house of fives. Fate and the teacher's mistake brought us Fletcher. He is now at the latter end of his journey, but we are glad our son was bone idle at least for one evening anyway. Fletcher and I now seek your forgiveness. So it's got a whole different sequence of punchlines in there. Obviously, the red balloon is one. I like the idea of the dog then playing dead because the little girl had said dead, and then they got the wrong Tom. Anyway, so it's a very nice tale, Pete. Thank you very much indeed for sending this in. And Joe goes first.
Well, completely and utterly forgiven, Pete. I mean, you couldn't possibly be blamed for the behaviour of Fletcher. You didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, the most brilliant story that I've ever heard that you do on Confessions. I absolutely love this. And that moment when you said about the balloon bursting and then the ash falling from the sky, how that family recovered, I have no idea. And thank goodness they had a sense of humour. But
like
what
yeah.
a story.
I like the fact that they said the grandfather actually would have loved it.
Yeah, so good. And then the punchline being that when they said the word dead, that Fletcher just rolled over on his back.
Yeah.
Just, I can imagine the tongue lolling. So yeah, totally forgiven. What a story. And I love the expression fur child. I've never heard that before.
Yes.
That's such a good expression.
You have
so,
a few,
yeah.
you've got a
We've
fur
got
child.
a couple of fur childs, yeah. One who would do exactly that same thing as Fletcher did. So yeah, totally forgiven, Pete. Brilliant story.
Bobby.
Furry 4-year-olds, that's what I call them. They never go to school, but they're just as expensive. What I love about that is that exclamation mark, that's my granddad, because I never would have thought it. I mean, that's such a lovely way to kind of pay your last respects to someone you love. The thing is, the only thing I'm going to say here, and I'm sorry to be a sport, because I haven't yet decided if I'm going to forgive you, Pete, because really, it's not Fletcher's behaviour. It's always the owner's fault, or mostly. I know we always get a dog that can do what it's like, but what you should have done is maybe carried balls around with you. So whenever he got someone else's ball, you just replace it and say, I'm so really sorry, here's your replacement football, here's your replacement. Well, I know. But the balloon thing is actually not Fletcher's fault. It is about we should have control over our animals. And if we can't, they should be on a lead. I'm just saying them's the rules, and I love them.
Yes.
I love this, Pete. I think what you got away with is with the lovely family's sense of humour. So luckily, no harm done. And then this time, I can forgive you.
But the one who shouldn't be forgiven is the teacher, surely, who got the thing wrong. That
Yeah,
Tom
got
was
the wrong
actually.
kid.
Yeah, you got the
Oh,
wrong
sorry
kid.
about
That's
that.
where the problem is
also,
here.
can I just say, a dog is for life, not just as a reward.
Yeah, well, that's true. But also, teacher got the wrong kid. Wrong Tom.
Yeah. But we've got one of those kids, and maybe I should bribe him with another dog. Maybe that
Bribery
might turn
always
things
works.
around at the very last moment.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Pete's Confession Up on the Woof, which featured the amazing ball-crazy spaniel Fletcher. And if you missed the confessions going out live this past week, then you wouldn't have heard the reaction on the people's verdict. So here's another chance to hear one of our favourite responses to Pete and Dear Fletcher's tale. Debbie Jones from Crosby in Liverpool. Yes, that was one of the most skillfully written, believable and hysterically funny confessions I've heard for ages. The bit that made me howl was when the little girl said the word dead and Fletch rolled over.
Right, yes. That was one of the, that was a favourite. I suspect people will be asking for that one for a while.
So
Many
good.
a twist and turn.
Confessions at bbc.co.uk. Don't go anywhere just yet. It's time for us to dig out a confession from the crypt.
And this week's has been requested by James, who says, I would like to request a confession from the crypt. The story is about the two schoolboys on work experience, which was from a podcast on the 7th of September 2012. Now, you might be wondering how I know the exact date the podcast came out. It's because I am Tom from said confession, and I thought you might want to know what happened next.
Tom. Oh, sorry.
Do you remember?
Well, Tom, it's Tom and the polyester slacks.
Oh,
It is.
It is, Tom. Yeah, it's a very good one.
Let's hear from Tom. In the confession, Marcus says that I had a few weeks to come clear, or he'd use it in his best man speech. Unfortunately, my portable music device had broken, so I didn't actually hear the podcast prior to the wedding. Jump to the wedding breakfast. Marcus was mid-speech. He'd complimented the bridesmaids, the mother of the bride, and the bride herself, and even got a couple of laughs. He then looked at me and said, "Tom, is there anything you'd like to get off your chest?" I replied with a nervous, "No." And then Marcus hit play on the audio system. All 126 guests then listened intently for the next 10 minutes while they heard the confession.
James continues saying the confession went down great and everyone found it very funny. Everyone apart from our mothers, who chased us around the room when they finally caught us and gave us a swift crack around the back of our head. I'm not sure that's legal. Marcus and I are still very close. I returned the favour and was his best man, and during my speech, I didn't hold back. We now both have daughters who were born within 3 months of each other, and it's great to see them two play with each other, and we can only hope that they end up being as close as we are.
So just for you, James and Tom, here is Tom's Diner.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the Holy Order, I am wanting forgiveness not for myself, but for my friend, who shall from this point on be referred to as Tom. 12 years ago, Tom and I were at high school together, and as is customary in most high schools, you have to spend 2 weeks doing work experience at a local employer's. Anyway, I had secured my work experience at a local graphic design studio, and Tom had the honour of working at the local fast food establishment, the one which had pictures of a portly man wearing a white suit. Tom's job also came with a delightful polyester uniform. This is quite important. On my foot, it's probably shiny and sparkly and that kind of thing. On my foot with a number of badges, stars, shows how good you are. On my first day, I discovered that the graphics company I was going to be working for had recently been taken over, and that they hadn't been told I'd be working for them for the next 2 weeks. As any 15-year-old would say, I saw this as a positive, as it meant that I could take the next 2 weeks off. Well, as long as neither my school or my mother found out. So each morning at 8 o'clock, I left the house, walked around the corner to the bus stop, but instead of waiting for the bus, I strolled across the road and into the park. This was a strategic move, because it gave me the perfect view of my house, and I could see when my mother set off to work, so I knew when the coast was clear for me to make my way back home. I did this every day for the rest of the 2 weeks, but it was on the third day that I undertook my misdeed. Each morning I would go and take refuge in the park, and each morning I would see Tom walking through the park to catch the bus. Tom is a creature of habit. Each morning he would get to the park entrance, sit on the second bench and enjoy a morning cigarette. Tom has since quit smoking, so you can't hold that against him. On this day, On this day, Tom was sat on his bench as usual, and just as his cigarette was about to go out, he threw it on the floor. Unfortunately, the lit cigarette did not land on the hard concrete, but on an old copy of the local newspaper. As you can imagine, the paper set on fire, and Tom stamped on it frantically, and in doing so, set light to his high-quality fast food restaurant trousers, which, as I said, were quite important. All I could do was to watch as Tom danced around like a lunatic trying to extinguish the flames. They eventually went out, and Tom seemed to be all right, apart from the fact that the trousers, which now resembled a skimpy pair of cut-off shorts like George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley used to wear in their Wham days. I didn't see Tom again until we returned back to school. The first day back, everyone in my year group was summoned to the hall for an assembly. A surprise assembly. We all sat down in rows facing the stage when our headmaster, who was a large, red-faced, angry man, walked in. Instead of greeting us with his usual, "Good morning, everyone," he announced, Tom Smith, please make your way to the stage." Tom casually walked to the front and up onto the stage, at which point 2 local firemen walked in. Everyone in the room looked at each other somewhat confused. Our head teacher then went on to tell how this particular young boy in front of us all had single-handedly and bravely put out a fire in the local park, which was started by a bunch of hooligans who had been smoking, and that he would be rewarded by the local fire and rescue department with a gift card for £20. He had apparently saved the historic bandstand, which was threatened with flames. If it hadn't been for Tom leaping around and stamping out the flames, it would surely have been lost. This was the story he had told. Tom was at the front looking very smug with himself. We were all told that we could learn a lot from this young man, as he had shown what a true man he is. I have never told Tom that I knew the truth behind his heroic battle, as I could never tell anyone that I didn't actually go to my work experience. So I'm not asking for forgiveness for the fact that I didn't attend my work experience and that I lied to my mother and school, or for not helping Tom whilst he was on fire. I am asking for forgiveness for Tom. Now, Tom is getting married in a few months' time, and I'm going to be his best man. I'm also aware that Tom downloads your Confessions podcast. I believe they're available via the Radio 2 website and other internet stores, so he will definitely hear this. I'm giving Tom the chance to come clean about this before I make it one of the main parts of my best man speech. If you think this sounds like blackmail,
it is.
You could be right. So I'm asking the confessional to forgive Tom for starting the fire, for lying to his parents, the school and the local fire department, and for being a little smug so-and-so while at school for no reason whatsoever. But he did look great in his burnt polyester trousers. Something we could all learn there. Well, it's an interesting tale. Be very careful, of course, if you're wearing one of those suits. What do you say, Sister Rebecca?
I think there's nothing to forgive Tom for, actually, because, nobody was harmed, and he just made the best of a bad lot. He made a fantastic story, a heroic story for himself, out of... Lying, but
money.
Nobody was harmed in that lie.
Who do you think paid for that £20? Who funds the firefighters? I think we do.
Oh, yes, you'll take it to a different level now.
I'm
never
speaking
thought
about the
of
Taxpayers'
that.
Alliance.
Yes, well, I think it wasn't that much money, and
okay.
I really think it was fine. What I want to know is what happened to the polyester trousers? Did he turn up at work with the little shorts
Well,
on?
I imagine so. He looked like George Michael in 1982.
Anyway, so Tom is forgiven.
There's a thought.
Yeah,
superior.
I would always caution. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I make a squeaking
You did,
sound?
yes.
I'm so sorry. I'd like to apologise to the studio manager over there. You should never wear polyester trousers. My mum used to wear polyester. Just your mum used to wear polyester trousers. You probably don't even know. They're like nylon things.
You used to have nylon sheets.
Bry nylon. Do you remember Bry nylon?
And Alan Freeman with Brentford nylons doing the ads on the television.
Do you remember that?
They were
Yeah.
fantastic.
It's not a great fabric. It's not a great look at any. So I'm quite pleased that they went up in flames. In all honesty, I can't understand why his little legs weren't hurt, but I'm glad that the nylon disappeared. So I think I am going to forgive you because you couldn't really give yourself away. Tom really shouldn't have been smoking. It's a terrible habit. I don't think people should.
No.
So that's a bit of a lesson for us all there, I
Yes.
think, Simon. So you are forgiven.
I'm not saying anything.
No.
In case your son's listening. Brother Matthew.
I remember in my first job, I had to wear brown pants, and
Do you mean pants?
is it like trousers? Yeah.
Or say trousers. and don't
Okay,
say
no,
pants.
they were pants.
Well, is this America?
Yes, it is. And they were brown, and I'd have done anything not to have to wear those brown. And if anyone had offered me the opportunity to burn those trousers, that's what I'd have done.
What job was this?
It was in a hot dog stand.
It wasn't Newsbeat then. I thought maybe there was a Newsbeat uniform.
No,
in
yes,
those
the
days.
Newsbeat brown trousers.
Rob McKenzie still wears
policy.
them.
Yeah, definitely. So I am going to forgive because if I'd had the chance, I'd have done the same. And and also he didn't do anything wrong, did he? He just basically didn't stand up and shout out, "You are taking that £20 by deception, sir. Show us your trousers." So yes, forgive.
That's
There you
another
go.
story, I think, Matt,
Yeah,
actually.
that's another story altogether.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt this week, featuring Matt, Rebecca, and Sally.
And now, if you have a request for a vintage confession, send us as many details as you can, including when it first went out, to confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our best to dig them out.
If you made it to the end of last week's podcast, we asked you to tweet us the code phrase, which was ghastly gastropods. Big thanks to Stephen, Scott, John, and everyone else who tweeted that. This week's code phrase is, I wanted to marry Captain Scarlet, which it does seem as though loads of people did.
Didn't we just? That's it. That's pretty much it for this week. If you have something to get off your chest, then do send in your own confession to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Confessions podcast, and you can hear the whole show live from 5 every weekday on BBC Radio 2. Joe, you've been amazing.
Oh, you've been better.
Bobby, you've been sensational.
All right, lovely. See you next week.
All right, lovely.
All right, my love.
Shut it.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.